Now, Russia says it has successfully tested a nuclear-powered cruise missile. President Putin says the Burevestnik is invincible and cannot be stopped by any air defense system. But experts are skeptical. Powered by a small nuclear reactor, they've called the weapon a flying Chernobyl. US President Donald Trump is also far from impressed, declaring that Russia should concentrate on ending its war in Ukraine rather than testing new missiles.
This is the Burevestnik missile, known as Skyfall by NATO, being launched in 2018. The nuclear-powered cruise missile is a nuclear-capable weapon that Moscow says can get through any defence shield. Russia's top general told President Vladimir Putin this past weekend that the missile travelled 14,000 kilometres and was in the air for around 15 hours during a test launch last week.
During the missile's flight, all the required vertical and horizontal maneuvers were completed, thereby demonstrating its high capabilities for bypassing anti-missile and air defense systems.
But some experts have been skeptical of its reliability. In 2019, it reportedly suffered an explosion, which led to a spike in radioactivity. In 2023, Vladimir Putin announced a successful test of the weapon.
Well, the system is intended to defeat a missile defense. And so the idea is because it can fly for basically an unlimited range, then it can fly around defenses. On the other hand, you could build more defenses, or you could use aircraft to go intercept them. So I don't think the system is invincible, but it's part of the deepening arms race that we're in, where they've come up with a new system and now we have to come up with something to shoot it down.
Last week, Russia released these images of ballistic weapons being launched. The flexing of Moscow's weapons capabilities comes amid growing frustration from Donald Trump over Russia's war in Ukraine.
I don't think it's an appropriate thing for Putin to be saying either, by the way. He ought to get the war ended. A war that should have taken 1 week is now in its soon 4th year. That's what he ought to do instead of testing missiles.
The Kremlin clapped back, saying it had to protect itself, pointing the finger at Europe.
The Europeans are gripped by hysteria that is Russia-phobic, aggressive and belligerent. Therefore, Russia must do everything possible to maintain the capability to guarantee its security.
But despite Russia's claims, it continues to strike Ukraine as European and US leaders push for peace talks between Kyiv and Moscow.
President Putin described the Burevestnik as a unique product that no one else in the world possesses. Marina Miron is a military expert at King's College London. I asked her whether this missile really is unique and whether it's any good.
Well, what we have to understand about Burevestnik is a bit of the context in terms of its uniqueness, what President Putin has claimed. This is not the first project of its kind. The very first one was launched by the United States during the Cold War in the 1960s. And it is believed that the Russians, or back then the Soviets, wanted to copy what the United States was doing. However, the United States had abandoned that project during the Cold War, and Russia has presumably continued working on this project. Also, there is nothing official. A lot of projects were shut down in the Soviet Union, especially prior to the collapse due to the economic situation. And so it seems that the Russians have then resumed this project in the early 2000s, and nobody else, as far as we know from official information, has been working on something similar. So from that perspective, yes, it is something unique.
Right. And as I understand it, what makes it so special is it's nuclear-powered, not nuclear-capable, nuclear-powered. It can fly for a very long time, and it can fly very low, which means that it's almost undetectable. But if I can put this in non-technical terms, is it unshoot-downable?
Why should it be unshoot-downable? I mean, it is a problem to shoot down cruise missiles of any type because of their low altitude radars. don't detect them in that range. But if this missile is detected, it can be shot down. The problem here is it can, because it has this small nuclear reactor engine, it can be in the air for a long time, and so it can approach its target from different directions. That's what might make it difficult. So detection would be a problem. Shooting down is not such a problem in itself, but detecting it would be problematic.
Is this missile or something like it likely to be deployed against Ukraine by Russia?
It is not a kind of missile that would be used in Ukraine or would make any sense to be deployed in Ukraine, because this is a nuclear capable missile. So this will be enhancing the Russian nuclear triad along with Poseidon and Avangard and Sarmat and the likes. And these are not the kinds of missiles that make any strategic sense to be deployed in Ukraine. It is a missile that is a deterrent for the West, for the United States, but certainly has no use in Ukraine, because Ukraine doesn't have sophisticated air defense systems that you would need to penetrate. The United States does. And you don't have a very long flight path to Ukraine as opposed to, say, the West Coast.
So this is a nuclear-powered missile. What happens to its nuclear propulsion unit when it hits the ground at hundreds of kilometers an hour?
We don't know. We don't know what the result of Russia's test. According to US intelligence reports, a lot of these tests have failed. So there were failures in 2017 or 2018, if I'm not mistaken, and radiation has been released. But we don't know what degree of radiation, how harmful it was. There were 5 casualties, I think, in the 2018 incident. The degree of harm is not known because there is so little information also when it comes to nuclear engineering and the design of the engine itself, of this nuclear-powered engine. We don't know how it is designed and what safety measures were taken to prevent any potential radiation leaks. So it is a big unknown.
Right. Perhaps a naive question on my part, but are there rules around this sort of thing? Are there rules around nuclear contamination from propulsion units rather than missiles?
Well, as I mentioned before, there are guidelines that exist when it comes to nuclear engineering, be it engines, propulsion engines, be it nuclear power plants, in terms of how you design, so the design processes, safety measures that you need to take when you design something in order to avoid any potential pitfalls in the testing stage. But there is no ban on the use of such engines. And we do remember Australia purchasing nuclear-powered submarines. Again, some countries don't like them, some countries don't like nuclear power, other countries use nuclear power and with a great degree of safety. So there is no specific ban on using nuclear engines, no.
A final word about the timing of the news of this, the proposed talks about Ukraine between the US and Russia about peace there. They crashed and burned last week, and then Russia announces this. So coincidence or just part of more game playing?
Well, what I think there are several reasons for that. On the one hand, the Russians are very proud that now, after so many years, they have managed to successfully test this missile that could be in service as early as next year. So obviously, it was important to announce this because a lot of money has been poured into this project. The other thing is, of course, the informational aspect to it. Because if you look at all Russian sources, and they're all hailing this missile, all Western sources are saying, well, it's there is a huge question mark in terms of its expenses, how many missiles could be in service, and how it works, and so on and so forth. So I think that the informational, psychological aspect here is also important, and against the background of possibly US sanctions against Russia, but there were some reports and some satellite imagery about a successful test potentially of Burevestnik back in August, so predating the Alaska meeting, Putin's Alaska meeting with President Trump. So possibly it is a way to reply to the US capabilities of what is known to be a prompt global strike. Probably it is a way to show that Russia is still very capable, despite all the sanctions, develop some cutting-edge technologies that the US doesn't have the means to intercept, and basically answering kind of that portion of the threat that Russia perceives from the prompt global strike. And so again, this is a posture that Russia has assumed to show also that it is still powerful and it's not going to back down. So there are a lot of possibilities to interpret what the message is by saying that the tests have been successful. And I think it's directed at different audiences, but both domestically and internationally.
Thank you for that, Marina. Military expert Marina Miron from King's College London.
Thank you for having me.